So as we continue our discussion on DC Rebirth, we pick up now with Action Comics Rebirth and the story Superman Meets Clark Kent. Now, before we get into this, again, something I want to do is draw your eyes to the description where you'll find my updated schedule on video releases. But with Action Comics Rebirth, this is one of the best runs in its entirety of DC Rebirth. Now, I am actually going to skip over the Superman versus Doomsday conflict for a second. And the reason why is because I want to come back to that, but I want to focus on this character of Clark Kent. I want to talk about this because this is something I've been wanting to discuss for quite some time because it's such a huge twist. We've never really seen anything like this that's last any measure of time. And this is one of the reasons why I like DC Rebirth so much. The entire concept of Action Comics Rebirth really has its roots in the New 52, Darkseid War, and Superman Truth. And what I mean here is during the events of Superman Truth, the New 52 Superman's identity as Clark Kent was dispersed throughout the world. Everybody came to know who he was. And so that's one of the reasons why when the pre-New 52 Superman showed up, a lot of people said, that's not Superman, so on and so forth. But this also ties directly into the question of who Clark Kent is. And what I mean is during Action Comics Rebirth, yes, the fight dealt with Superman versus Doomsday, but it wasn't the most extreme thing. It wasn't the most insane thing ever. It was a really cool conflict, and it was really just an example of how Doomsday always learns from what defeats him. And it was just kind of like cementing the pre-New 52 Superman and his place in the New 52 universe as the new Superman. But the fact remained here that the undercurrent under all this was Clark Kent. And the reason why I say that is in Action Comics Rebirth, Clark Kent had just shown up as a guy. And it was funny because Jimmy Olsen had asked the question, well, you're Superman. Like, I know you're Superman. The world knows you're Superman. Go fight Doomsday. And Clark Kent kept saying, no, I'm not Superman. And that's the one thing he kept saying all throughout the Action Comics story. Every time people saw him, they said, why are you letting that Superman fight Doomsday? You should go fight him. And Clark Kent kept saying, no, I'm not Superman. I am just Clark Kent. I'm just a guy. Now, we didn't really get an answer to the question. And in fact, DC was holding that to this story arc. We didn't know who this Clark Kent was. We didn't know where he came from. We didn't know what his whole story was. In our mind, we were just kind of left to our own devices. And it was interesting reading all these different theories online because people were saying, well, maybe the Superman Clark Kent persona split and they were one individual, but now they're two separate individuals. When the New 52 Superman died, the Clark Kent persona took on a mind of its own, so to speak. There were all these different theories that were floating around. We were just kind of having to wait until the story was released. But what this does is this picks up with Clark Kent as the reporter dealing with people trying to kill him. Now, this is kind of cool here because this is basically Dan Jurgens focusing on what Clark Kent's capable of as just a regular guy. And this is something that we never saw because, again, in previous stories since the beginning of the Superman mythos in 1938, Clark Kent would always just race off, become Superman, come back, fight bad guys, and then become Clark Kent again. That was his thing. That's just how he functioned. But in the story, Clark Kent's holding his own against various forces and talking about how the life of a reporter puts him in jeopardy all the time. And this is interesting because this is kind of like something we would expect from Lois Lane. Lois Lane would be the one to say, well, being a reporter constantly puts you in danger. Being a reporter constantly puts you in a situation where your life's in danger and someone might try to kill you. So to see Clark Kent make this case is a little interesting to me. But the fact remains here that once he gets past, all these things, we realize that he's actually been brought onto a stage at the request of Lex Luthor. Now, this is where I want to get into a little explanation of where we stand with the Superman mythology at the moment. Following the events of the death of the New 52 Superman, because he was gone and because the pre-New 52 Superman hadn't quite become the world superhero, that is to say, he hadn't quite stepped into the role of being part of the Justice League and things like that, Lex Luthor took it upon himself to use the remnants of Darkseid's forces to basically use a mother box to power a new form of Lex Luthor armor that had the Superman sigil. And the goal was for Lex Luthor to basically step into the role of being Superman. Now, this was a long time coming. It had really been this way since Forever Evil. It had really been this way since Lex Luthor led villains against the forces of the crime syndicate and save the world. And so this reformation of Luthor becoming a good guy it was always sort of leading to this point. We didn't know it was going to lead to him taking up the mantle of Superman, but it always sort of made sense, to be honest, simply because Lex Luthor was such a formidable foe of Superman and had been for so long. It's like the Batman-Joker dichotomy. If Batman's dead, well, then the Joker's purpose ceases to be. If Superman's dead, then when Lex Luthor's purpose ceases to be. And so we'd have to find some way to make up for that. But because he was on the road to becoming a good guy, it made sense that he would take on the mantle of becoming Superman. But the fact remains here that because of the fact that everybody had witnessed the pre-New 52 fight Doomsday, and because it had given rise to the question of what's going on with this Clark Kent character, the entire basis behind this press conference is to answer that question, for Clark Kent to get up on stage and to tell the world his story, to answer the questions of why it is that Clark Kent and Superman were both seen in the same place at the same time. Now, one of the other cool things here is that this entire press conference is being watched by the pre-New 52 Superman. It's being watched by him and his family. The issue here is that once they start to get into the discussion, once they start to have this debate, one guy freaks out and immediately starts shooting at Clark. Now, it's not in an effort to actually kill him. Instead, this guy genuinely believes that Clark Kent is Superman and is lying. And so what he wants to do is shoot Clark Kent to prove that he's Superman by virtue of the fact that the bullets would just bounce off of him. Of course, he is subdued. He's not successful in shooting Clark Kent, but the fact is that all these people that he's been running into seem to have been doing this, or at the very least, that seems to be the indication. But once his press conference ends, of course, he's back at the Daily Planet talking to Perry White and so on and so forth, and he succumbs to a polygraph test. Now, the polygraph test is designed to, of course, determine whether or not Clark Kent is telling the truth, and a series of baseline questions are answered. For those of you guys who don't know, of course, polygraph tests are basically not admissible when it comes to the judicial system, simply because they can be faked. There's a lot of different reasons why you can't use them, but there are less savory organizations out there that will use a polygraph test. And whenever a polygraph test is administered, a series of baseline questions are asked in order to determine heart rate whenever an honest answer is given. And so that's why they'll ask things like, is your name such and such, or they'll ask, is your skin white, or are you wearing a red shirt right now? They'll ask a series of general questions that you obviously cannot lie about. And so that way they'll be able to determine a baseline to determine whether you are actually lying. Now, of course, Clark Kent passes the test. He says that he is Clark Kent. He is not Superman. Perry White seems to be satisfied. But again, we as the reader are just kind of left. We're kind of asking the question, is this really true? Is this really what's going on right now? And so what happens is as Clark Kent makes his way out onto the street, as he's talking to various individuals, so on and so forth, doing his job as a reporter and inciting the wrath of these people who are trying to kill him, he's actually rescued by Superman. Now, something else I want you to take note of here is that there is a guy with a beard who is watching all these events unfold. Now, who this man is, we don't know yet. We don't really know who he is or what he's about or where he's from. There's some speculation, but again, this is just an example where we're just kind of left to our own devices here. Now, Dan Jurgens will undoubtedly reveal this at a future point in time. But for right now, the entirety of the story shifts its focus to Clark Kent and Superman. It shifts the focus to giving us the answers that we have on the question of who is Clark Kent, the question of where did he come from? What's his whole backstory? And so what we do here is we jump to the Fortress of Solitude. Now, again, for those of you guys who have been reading Superman since the beginning of the New 52, you'll recognize aspects of this. Of course, when the pre-New 52 Superman showed up to take the place of the New 52 Superman when he died, he basically just adopted the New 52 Superman's Fortress of Solitude. Now, he made a couple changes, but for the most part, he didn't change much. And the reason why is because in the mind of Superman, he wanted to pay homage to his predecessor. He wanted to pay homage to the New 52 version of Superman who had fought and saved the world so many times. And so it would seem disrespectful to go through and just change everything around. It would seem disrespectful to go through and have everything be adjusted. And so even if it's really just a testament to the New 52 Superman's version of Krypton and his legacy and so on and so forth, for the pre-New 52 Superman, it's a tribute to the New 52 Superman, so on and so forth. But the fact remains here that Superman brought Clark Kent here for the purpose of finding answers, for the purpose of figuring out what exactly it is that he knows, who he is, and where he comes from. And so what happens is the pre-New 52 Superman grabs a device that's able to more or less tell the life of a person, to see their past, to see who they are, where they came from. And so he has Clark Kent expose himself to this. He has Clark Kent basically immerse himself in this device so that we as the reader will learn who he is. And what we find out is that this Clark Kent is not Superman, and he never was. He had his own life. He was raised by his own family. He was, he dated and so on and so forth. He had his own history, his own legacy. The issue here is that when the New 52 Superman first popped up, because of the fact that this Clark Kent existed, because they looked so similar to one another, the issue was people will undoubtedly come after this Clark Kent, come after the real Clark Kent. And so what Superman did, what the New 52 Superman did, is he sent Clark Kent into hiding. He basically sent him away from the eyes of the world to ensure that no one would ever come after him. The issue was that once the New 52 Superman powers began to dissipate, this plan seemed to go up in smoke in its entirety. And so Clark Kent was effectively pulled out. He really didn't have anywhere to go when the New 52 Superman died. The entire purpose of the plan was no longer, an issue anymore. Now, something to point out here is that the reemergence of Clark Kent did not account for the return of the pre-New 52 Superman, because remember, when the pre-New 52 Superman first showed up in DC Comics, as part of the New 52, no one knew he was there. No one knew that he was around. The Justice League didn't know, Batman didn't know. No one knew that he was there. Now, this is really just a testament to the experience of the pre-New 52 Superman, the fact that he knows how to work around the intelligence of Bruce Wayne. He knows how to avoid detection, by the Justice League Watchtower, assuming that it had any real similarity to the one that he was familiar with in the pre-New 52 universe, but he knew how to stay hidden. And so because of the fact that no one knew about the pre-New 52 Superman, Clark Kent said, well, if the New 52 Superman's dead, there's probably not going to be any concern for me, so I can just, come out of hiding again. And so this is basically just DC telling us, here's what's going on with this version of Clark Kent. Now, there will be more that goes on here. There will be more that happens here. But what Dan Jurgens also does is he gives us a little bit of a follow-up to the original Action Comics story. And what I mean here is that in Action Comics Rebirth, of course, when the pre-New 52 Superman had fought the pre-New 52 Doomsday in the New 52 continuity, the question was, how can the pre-New 52 Superman defeat Doomsday? Because whenever Doomsday dies, he comes back impervious to what killed him. Not only that, because the two had fought, and because Superman had died during the Death of Superman story arc in 1992 or whatever it was that it was released, when Doomsday returned, every time he came back, it was more and more difficult for him to defeat. But more so than that, he had learned battle tactics. He had learned strategy. He had learned deception. He learned how to trick Superman and various other forces into being distracted by other objects, by other people. Doomsday came to realize that it'll be more difficult for Superman to beat him if he were to put civilians in harm's way intentionally as opposed to accidentally. And so in order for the pre-New 52 Superman to defeat Doomsday, at the end of that Action Comics story, he had basically confined Doomsday to the Phantom Zone, or at least believed he had, because the Phantom Zone was inescapable. It was the one place that Superman could put Doomsday without ever having to worry about Doomsday coming back. The issue here was that Doomsday was actually taken before he reached the Phantom Zone. He was kidnapped and he was used by what appear to be time brokers, or appear to be individuals who are going to use Doomsday for their own purposes. Now again, a lot of this ties into the ongoing mythos with regards to Mr. Oz, who might be Ozymandias from the Watchmen universe, but at this point, DC's only peppered in a little bit of that stuff. And so right now, we just kind of have a series of fragmented appearances. We have no real clue what's going on with regards to the bigger picture. But for the purpose of this video, for the purpose of Superman meeting Clark Kent, this 2-issue story arc was simply designed to tell us that this Clark Kent is literally just a guy, that he was a person that just looked like the New 52 Superman. The New 52 Superman sent him into hiding in order to keep him safe. And when the New 52 Superman died, that Clark Kent came out of hiding, which resulted in the current circumstance that we're in right now. And so again, because of the fact that the world is now aware that both Clark Kent and Superman are two completely different people, it basically provides us with a situation where Dan Jurgens can kind of go where he wants to with this Clark Kent. We don't know what he'll do. We don't really know what direction the story will take. All we really know is that at the moment, when this thing comes to an end, when this story is brought to an end, we're left on a bit of a cliffhanger, in the sense that we're faced with what appears to be Apocalypse, the planet of Darkseid that has the Superman sigil, and some individual, this mysterious person, saying the path is clear. The only answer is death. So again, we don't really know where we're going from here. But the fact remains that for those of you guys who were curious about what was going on with the Clark Kent Superman dichotomy in DC Rebirth, this video should answer that question for you guys. So again, if you enjoy this, make sure you guys hit the like button, make sure you guys hit the sub button, become part of the Rob Corps, and leave a comment. Tell me what you guys think. And yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.